What is the place of the Ghana Refugee Board in that? And as a matter of fact, the Ghana government in all of this? When we say international community making that decision, what do we mean?
Right. Just as Rabna explained, it's not a decision that is taken by just one government.
Okay.
It's a decision that is taken by all the governments, all the countries hosting Liberian refugees. And it also has the involvement of the Liberian government as well.
Okay.
So it's a decision that is arrived at after a very long process of analyzing the situation in Liberia. Now, the Ghana Refugee Board is the sole agency for granting refugee status to refugees or people who seek asylum in Ghana.
Okay.
In the case of Liberians, the refugee status was granted to them, just as Rabna pointed out, it was granted to them based on the generalized violence in their country at the time. So we did not, for instance, interview individuals who are applying for asylum. Which is what is normally done for people who are seeking asylum. We need to interview you, look at your claim, and make sure that there's probably what your story is probably true. We did not do that for all the Liberians that came in the country because of the large numbers that came in, and because
over 40,000, you said?
Over 40,000
okay.
at the peak. And as well, we knew why they were fleeing, so we did not need to do this for individuals. So the role of the Refugee Board at this point is to make recommendations to Ghana government as to what other options are available, because we do know, I mean, it would be naive to think that every Liberian will go back home.
Okay.
Some of them left 20 years ago. Some of them virtually have no ties. Many of them were born here. Some of them have never returned to Liberia. Some of them have never been in Liberia. So the fact is that definitely a few of them will remain. And what the board is doing is making recommendations to government as to how to assist these people who may want to choose to remain in Ghana legally.
Let me ask you a quick question related to that. So what happens to the other Liberian refugees who are in other countries, like not in Ghana?
At this point in time, all Liberians in the sub-region who are in the sub-region as refugees will cease to be refugees on the 30th of June. The invocation of the cessation clause applies to all Liberian nationals who fled during the war and who fled the violence at the time.
I see. So it affects all of them in the sub-region.
Absolutely.
And all the countries in the sub-region will be asking them to go back or find alternative solutions.
Exactly.
You mentioned that, Rabna, in your earlier submission. So what are the alternatives available to those who cannot go? As it is said, it would be naive to assume that every single one of them will go back. It won't happen.
Right.
What are the options open to them?
Well, as my colleague Paddy rightly said, this affects refugees, Liberian refugees in the sub-region. I mean, so other governments that are hosting Liberian refugees are also going to invoke the cessation clause. Some of these governments have already have reached different phases in adopting other solutions for Liberian refugees. Like Sierra Leone has a local integration policy for Liberian refugees who wish to locally integrate or become permanent residents of Sierra Leone because they don't wish to return, they can't return, or for other reasons. Either they have strong ties to Sierra Leone, they've never been to Liberia, or for whatever reason. And they actually tried out local integration and it worked perfectly for them. It doesn't necessarily mean that it works for every situation, but in their situation it worked quite well. So they gave Liberian refugees then permanent residence status. Some of them even have, they have ID cards, they have health insurance, they can basically benefit from whatever services that Sierra Leoneans can benefit from, with the exception of the right to vote. We have other countries too. Guinea has also tried local integration, though on a smaller scale, because they had fewer refugees than Sierra Leone did. We've had some countries like Nigeria who have said, you just need to settle someplace, so we can give you legal status, and then we'll give you a cash grant of this much to help you settle. That worked in their situation because they had more refugees living in the urban setting than we do here in Ghana. And so it really depends on the situation, and the Ghana government the Ghana Refugee Board is really the best agency to advise government on what would work for Ghana.
I've seen this leaflet that you gave to me, and since I'm coming right back over to you, because there are some interesting questions and answers on this one. They basically have to register to even take advantage of the cessation clause. Is that right? They have to register. There's a deadline. Is it March or something? I think I saw that somewhere.
Well,
30th March. Is that it? Registration for voluntary repatriation with UNHCR assistance must be done before 30th March 2012. Yes. That's with the UNHCR assistance.
Right. What they have to register for is for help returning to Liberia.
Yes.
Because if you want to return to Liberia,
yes,
and UNHCR does assist or facilitate voluntary repatriation to your home country,
yes,
then you need to do so by a certain period.
Okay.
Because what we don't want to happen is have a big backlog of people on June 29th saying, oh, I want to return home. And there are a lot of logistical challenges with facilitating repatriation. We have to book the flights. We have to, ensure that the luggage is booked and everything. Give them medical screening, everything. So the deadline for voluntary repatriation is end of March,
okay,
so that we can ensure that everybody who wants to return to Liberia with UNHCR's assistance can do so before the June 30th cutoff date.
If someone doesn't want to go for the reasons you cited, what can they do?
Well, at the moment, the Refugee Board has put together some recommendations for government. I cannot go into the details because it has not been approved yet. But the other option, failing local integration policy, the other option is to approach immigration and regularize your stay as a Liberian who would like to live in Ghana and go through the regular immigration procedures. So that is what will be available, assuming that local integration policy is not passed.
Assuming that is not passed.
Assuming.
Do you have an idea, Rabna, how much the UNHCR has spent on Liberian refugees since they first came to Ghana?
That would be very tricky. Of course, it's with each year we have different priorities and objectives, and we have a different population. Increasingly, we start to see fewer and fewer Liberian refugees and more of other nationalities such as Togolese, Sudanese, and Ivorian. So it can be very difficult. We do have published, records of our budget, our operational budget every year. Last year, for instance, our budget was 5.5 million, but of course, a lot of that was spent.
CDs?
Dollars, sorry, $5.5 million.
Right.
Much of that was spent on the Ivorian refugee crisis.
Okay.
And so not as much was spent on Liberian refugees. We've gradually started to shift away from material assistance and looking more towards building their self-reliance. Okay. However, at the height of the crisis, if you consider the fact that we have 10,000 Ivorian asylum seekers as of now, and we spent $5.5 million on that operation last year. Consider how much we spent on Liberian refugees when there were 40,000 of them. So that's essentially how you could gauge the extent to which the international community has invested in the refugee program in Ghana.
Is it true that the Liberian refugees have most of the time refused to be integrated into Ghanaian society?
Well, we organize what we call profiling exercises from time to time, verification exercises from time to time, and some of the questions we ask are what the intentions of the refugees are. In 2009, about 3,000 of them opted to stay in Ghana if they would be given the opportunity. So that's the largest figure we've had. Okay. Unfortunately, this is not a static figure because with time, due to availability of different types of information, due to changes in people's circumstances, they change their minds. So I cannot say that today 3,000 people would like to locally integrate. But we will only find out once a policy is approved, and then we can ask people to tell us if they want to stay.
Okay. And to add to that also, I think it can be hard to tell because the cries of a few doesn't necessarily, reflect on what the opinions of the whole are. And when you have 11,000 Liberian refugees that live in a place like Buduburam, and you have 300 people protesting, saying that they don't want to stay, that doesn't mean that the 11,000, the other 10,700 don't want to stay. And I think sometimes there are a lot of people who don't feel the need to voice whether or not they want to stay. They've already integrated in some respects. They're working. Right. They have their children in public schools. They speak Tree. They have integrated for all intents and purposes.
Married to Ghanaians.
Married to Ghanaians, yep. Exactly. And so yeah, they may not have been out there with placards saying I don't want to integrate or I do want to integrate, but their intentions or their wishes need also to be recorded and also recognized. But
really, is citizenship an issue for some of them? Because acquisition of Ghanaian citizenship is also a different process altogether and comes with its own legal requirements. But is that an issue for some of them as well? Because you have explained the possibility of saying that you are in the sub-region, you want to stay in Ghana, you want to go through the immigration and all of those things. But if you are a citizen, they accord you certain rights that then will not require that you go through all these things. Has that also featured?
That hasn't featured in the discussions so far. And indeed, we haven't had Liberians approaching us and asking about citizenship.
I see.
What they've sought to find out is how they can stay here legally.
Okay.
And that is what Ghana Refugee Board is working on. But we haven't had people asking about citizenship.
Would you say that the violence that was recorded, particularly last year, the Buduburam campaign, periods before that, has also sort of factored into this whole cessation? Yes, it's a legal principle, this is a time, but the Ghana government saying, yeah, I want to go along with it simply because perhaps somebody is tired of them.
Well, I'm sure that, like we said, there are a lot of governments that contribute towards the decision-making process, right? And so there are some of these political influences, they feel as though this particular security situation influences their decision-making. Yeah. But I don't think so necessarily, because, like I said, cessation has been something that has been discussed for a long time. And there have been a few times when we thought that it was going to be invoked. We thought it was going to be invoked last year. We thought it was going to be invoked the year prior to that. And I think more than anything, it's the situation in Liberia that dictates the timeline for cessation declaration. And the recent elections that were held in Liberia, I think the international community wanted to wait to see how that went. And it, of course, confirmed what they believed to be the case, that Liberia is now secure and safe. And
just to add to that, it's not only Liberians who are affected by the cessation clause. Rwandese, for instance, the refugees from Rwanda, the cessation clause is also being invoked. So that should tell you that it's not really influenced by what has happened in Buduburam.
But not Ivorians yet.
Not Ivorians yet.